We are so happy and encouraged by each and every one of your presence here tonight. Tonight is the second part in this wonderful series being led by Brother Buddy Payne. And I'd like to go over just a little bit of information first as far as the Q&R card reminder. If you look in the book rack in the pew in front of you, you'll find a white 4x6 card. And that card will serve several purposes tonight. If you're visiting with us, you can scan that QR code on that card and input your information electronically, or you can simply fill out the card with your information. It's not required that you put down your personal information, however. We would love a record of your attendance, and we will use this to keep you updated as we have other events like this going on throughout the year. Also, if you have any prayer requests, please write that on that card, and we will pray for you in the closing tonight at the very end. And so if you have a prayer request, include that on that card as well, and we will include that tonight in our closing prayer. You can also use this card to write down any questions you would like Buddy to answer during the question and answer session at the very end. And if you need a card, please hold up your hand and we will bring you one. A couple of our deacons will collect these cards later on tonight. And then also, just for everyone's information, Buddy will be at the Olive Garden tomorrow. It's on 124th from 1 to 3 p.m. And so that's tomorrow, 1 to 3 p.m. at the Olive Garden on 124th. That sounds like a lot of salad and breadsticks. Okay, sounds like a good time. Before Buddy speaks for us tonight, I would like to share with you a bio about Buddy so that you know who Buddy is. And after the bio is read, our brother Jack Hafer, who is a preacher at the Dallas Organ Church, will be leading us in an opening prayer. And then our brother Kyle Capelli will be leading us in a song. And he attends the Monroe Church. Okay, this is Brother Buddy's bio. We are happy to have Brother Buddy Payne with us this weekend to bring a series of lectures on evidences for God in the natural world. Because the lectures on Friday and Saturday deal primarily with evidence gathered from sciences, we want our audiences to know his background and credentials that have led us to invite him for such a series. He began his college career with an associate in arts degree from Florida College in 1965, followed by a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry education from Florida State University in 1967. He received a full scholarship to Harvard University to complete a master's degree in science education in 1968, and later completed a PhD in mathematics education from the University of South Florida. Dr. Payne is a science and mathematics educator. As such, he spent many years teaching chemistry and calculus at Florida College. Later in his career, he was invited to serve as an administrator and ultimately served as the president of Florida College for 13 years. Upon his retirement from the presidency in 2022, President Payne was asked to serve in his current role as chancellor. Buddy currently serves as one of the elders at the North Livingston congregation in Coots, Florida, near Tampa. During Dr. Payne's over 55 years as a science educator, he dedicated much of his time to studying, discussing, debating, and lecturing on the subjects of his lectures this weekend. He is an ardent believer in God. He believes that God has left a testimony of his existence and his creative power in the design we observe in nature. He is passionate about sharing what he has learned with us, and we are glad you have joined us to share in this enriching learning experience. Brother Jack Hafer.
Let us go to God in prayer. Our great God and Father, we just stand in awe of you, how majestic you are. And we look at your world that you have made for us. We just praise you and thank you, especially that through your creation, you have made yourself evident to us. So we know you are, and you are our Father. We thank you, God, that you have brought Brother Payne to us, and then you have gifted him with such talents and abilities, and we're even more thankful that he uses them for your cause and for your glory. So we gather here, God, to learn more about how we can defend our faith, and we can feel confident that we are truly wonderfully and fearfully made, and our hearts know it. But we need to know more, Father, and so we ask for your forgiveness when we're doubt and we're not strong in faith like we ought to be. Please help us to grow so we can become bold servants of thine, and we speak proudly of who you are in your Son, Jesus Christ. We're most thankful for him, and in his name we pray. Amen.
Our God, he is alive. If you'd like to stand with me, we're going to sing the first verse only. Do, mi, sol.
Just a couple of comments before I begin my lecture tonight. This is a class, and this is a lecture, not a sermon. So in our class and in this lecture, I want some participation of the audience. So please help me with that as we get to those points. Secondly, it's a great pleasure to be with you and to share this information and to tell you what my main goal in these lectures is. I want everyone who has been involved in listening to these to leave this place overwhelmed with the majesty of our Creator. That's my goal. I understand very well you're not going to remember most of what I say. You won't understand some of it. I hope you can understand sufficient to be overwhelmed, which means I want your rapt attention. And I don't allow sleeping. That's enough about that. You live in the most exciting time in the history of mankind when it comes to understanding how life works at the chemical level. I'm a chemistry teacher, so we're in my favorite subject tonight, and I know you're as excited as I am to think about the chemistry of living things. Never in the history of mankind have we understood how living things function better than we do now. We still do not know very much. Don't mistake me to be thinking that we understand it all. We're far from it. But we have a deeper appreciation. Some of the things that have happened in the last 70 years, just to give you a taste. In the 1950s, Watson and Crick were given credit for discovering the structure of DNA, which has become a common household word now. The uncovering of the structure of that substance is the key to life as we know it. And it has unfolded a host of further discoveries. They received the Nobel Prize for that in 1962. About that same time, Frederick Sanger is given credit for actually the structure of the first protein that was ever analyzed completely, insulin. 1950s. He received the Nobel Prize for that as well. Sanger is one of the few folks in chemistry who received a second Nobel Prize a few years later for learning how to map DNA. Unbelievable. This all has happened in the last 70 years. Many other things I could tell you about, but for the sake of time, I'm going to skip to one other important thing. In the 50s, if you were alive in the 50s, raise your hand and make me feel better. Thank you. Class, in the 50s, 1957, what great event took place that scared us to death? Sputnik, thank you. You kids know what Sputnik is? Nah. Sputnik was an object put up in space by the Russians. Scared us to death. We knew Russia was going to take over space and rule the world. What happened as a result of that, class, is our government forked out huge amounts of money to colleges and universities to improve our science education. I was a beneficiary of that because I received a full scholarship to Harvard out of those funds. Thank you very much. And was a part in helping design new curricula for chemistry for the whole world, basically the United States. So you lived through this as we tried to upgrade our education system so that we can compete better in a dangerous world. And out of that, I think, have come a host of other results in the sciences that have helped humanity to understand better about living things. Along with that set of progress came a very heady response by humans that we're learning so much now about life that we're going to soon be able to produce life ourselves. And the thought that we're going to need to lean on some kind of a God became less and less accepted. And so, on April the 8th, 1966, Time magazine put out this series. The headline was, "Is God Dead?" And I can tell you, living through this, and those of you who were alive in those days, remember, this was a big movement in that time. And widespread. I was being told in my college classes that those of us who were believers in God better soon decide that that's an ancient belief that needs to be relegated with all the other myths of the ancient days. And so this magazine article was representative of what was happening. You just sang a song written by A.W. Dicus called "Our God, He is Alive." That was written in 1966. And A.W. Dicus was the dean of Florida College. And I literally sat in his seat later as the dean of Florida College and have deep respect for this man who was a physicist and a renowned one, by the way. And he wrote this song specifically in response to this. And so thank you for singing it with vigor just a moment ago, because here in the 21st century, we still believe, don't we, that our God is alive. But in that time, in this article and other publications like the book Radical Theology and the Death of God by Altizer and Hamilton, who, by the way, were preachers in the supposed Christian faith, they said things like this: we must realize that the death of God is an historical event, that God has died in our cosmos and in our history, and the dead God is the God of the historic Christian church and beyond the church of Christendom at large. So here are preachers telling their congregations and publicly declaring the God we thought was real is dead. It went right along with the scientists who were discovering all these secrets about living things and coming to believe that what we're going to learn soon enough is that all of this was a natural process which happened without God. And so that's what was unfolding those years. I have to confess to you, I became very passionate as a young man because I was troubled by these things. And I had very intelligent teachers, both in high school and in college, who were persuasive on this matter of scientific materialism, that there's no need for God, that the tendency of humans is to try to explain things they don't understand by sticking God in. And may I say to you at this juncture that I hope you become convinced by the end of these lectures that not only is it not the God of the gaps argument anybody's making, but that the more we learn about the natural world, the more reason there is to believe in God. That's where I'm coming from. But this was the approach in those days, and that's what we were dealing with. And let me read you another thing. This is a part of the Humanist Manifesto. This particular version was published in 1973. We find insufficient evidence for the belief in the existence of a supernatural. It is either meaningless or irrelevant to the question of survival and fulfillment of the human race. As non-theists, we begin with humans, not God. Nature, not deity. Nature indeed may be broader and deeper than we know, but any new discoveries, however, will but enlarge our knowledge of the natural. And so the humanist organization thinks the natural is all there is, all there ever was, all there ever will be. That became the prevailing approach in the scientific community, and it is to this day. And those who proclaim then, like I do, openly that they're believers in God, end up oftentimes in a troublous situation if they're scientists, because it's considered unacceptable. At the very least, it's considered sticking religion into the sciences, and that's considered unacceptable. Well, I want to tell you there's a new book out, copyright 2021. Is Atheism Dead? And do you see on it that it's got a snake swallowing its own tail? This is by Eric Metaxas. I'd highly recommend it to you. I think you ought to get this book and read it. He says in this text, since that Time article in 1966, roughly 5 things have arisen to challenge, and I will argue to overturn the secular consensus that formed in the wake of that article. Eric Metaxas hit the nail on the head on that comment, because the secular consensus that followed that article wasn't because of the article, it's because the article represented what was going on. I'm convinced is being overthrown by the sciences class, and Metaxas argues the same thing here. And here are the 5 things that he brings up. Science has demonstrated there was a beginning to matter, time, and space. Did we mention that last night, class? Yes. I'm not talking about that one in this lecture, but there's plenty of material, and there's a bibliography on the back if you want to study that more for yourself. Second, fine-tuning. Did we deal with that last night, class? Everywhere you look, the properties of nature are fine-tuned to support life on this planet, around this sun. And in every case, what you find is everything that we looked at that relates to this has to be what, class? Yeah, that wasn't very enthusiastic. But it has to be just right. So he brings that up and has a good lengthy discussion about that in here. And then stupefying complexity. That's our topic tonight. I want you walking out of here stupefied. And then he mentions archaeological discoveries that have been made in the last 100 years that support the text of the Bible. That's another whole subject. I'm not talking about that. And then he says the 5th thing is we've learned what atheism produces in the last 100 years. And if you'll bear with me, I just want to read you a few comments from his book about what atheism has done for us in the last century. It's a really sad story. And in spite of that, class, there are a group of men calling themselves the new atheists. They call them the Four Horsemen, who are proclaiming like preachers why you should be an atheist. And their influence is going across this country, and it's affecting a lot of young people. And they somehow blind themselves to what atheism produces. So I want to share with you these facts. Let's be more specific. In the year 1937 alone, dedicatedly atheistic Soviets murdered 106,300 clergymen in 1 year. The Soviets, in the course of their adoption of what they call scientific atheism, murdered between 12 and 20 million human beings. Again, the numbers are too much to be borne. Let us say it again. Nowhere, even among the most egregious examples of religious malfeasance in history, do we begin to approach the scale of such atheistic atrocities. It is atheism alone, and especially scientific atheism, to use the cheerful Soviet parlance, that sought to murder en masse those whom they could not tolerate and with whom they did not wish to coexist. And it's the truth. I lived with my wife in Romania from 1993 to 95 and my son, which had formerly been under the auspices of the communist government. They were relieved from that in 1989, but the problem was they still had a communist government. And we lived it, folks. We had a brother in the church there who had been put in prison for owning a Bible. Many others lost their lives. It remains unendurably horrible fact that the dedicatedly atheist regimes of the last century alone tortured and murdered multiplied millions, usually for their Jewish or Christian faith. In fact, those murdered by the handful of atheist regimes amount to about 150 million people. We have learned, class, what atheism has to offer. Don't listen to the new atheists who want to talk about how many folks were killed by religious wars. It fades into oblivion compared to what atheism has done. I'm in no way supporting religious wars and the things that were done in the name of religion that are horrendous. But they're nothing compared to what atheism does. So is atheism dead? I pray so, but no, it isn't dead yet, and probably won't be. But it's a good book to read, class, for your instruction and edification. I'll start here again this evening. The scriptures teach that the study of nature should lead you to a belief in God. I am not speaking tonight from this book in this lecture. I believe this book is God's Word, and I love to preach from it. Come back tomorrow. But tonight, I'm not speaking from this book. But I do want you to know that in Romans 1, verse 20, this book teaches us that God has spoken through the nature that He produced. It says in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." The argument, class, from the Bible is you can see God, who's invisible, by the things that He made. It's the argument from design, which is what I'm using all during this series. We're going to see another instance tonight of design everywhere you look. So with that introduction, I turn my attention now to the chemistry of living things. What could be better? You don't like chemistry? You needed to have me as your teacher. So I hope you walk out of here in love with chemistry also. Chemistry points to a great designer class everywhere you look. So let's start this way. You're in my first class of biochemistry. Welcome. Good to have you. I'm glad you paid your tuition and signed up for it. We start class with talking about the critical components of life. So I thought we should do that by looking at a little book written by Francis Crick himself. It's called Life Itself, Its Origin and Nature by Francis Crick. Now, I know you remember what I said a while ago, that he's one of the ones that given the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA. So if there's anybody that should know what life is like at the chemical level, it's him. So I'm going to turn to page 70-something here in his book and read you just a few things that he said to introduce you to life at the chemical level. You see what the screen says, critical components of life. Life as we know it, and may I interrupt the quote here, life as we know it. These guys like to say that, life as we know it. Class, we don't know any other kind of life. Okay? They can talk about other forms of life that might be out there somewhere and make up stories about how it might have come about. There is no other form of life anybody knows one thing about except what's here. Okay? Life as we know it on Earth appears as a synthesis of two macromolecular systems. The proteins, because of their versatility and chemical reactivity, do all the work, but are unable to replicate themselves in any simple way. Shelley, did I lose you? Oh. Two big giant molecules, okay? I'm going to put it in common English. Every living thing has two kinds of giant molecules. First is the proteins. They're the workhorses. So let me show you up here. The structural materials of living things are made up of proteins. And proteins, class, are assembled from amino acids. We're getting back to that in a minute. They make up the shape and mobility of things. Proteins. So your shape and mobility consists of proteins mostly. Secondly, there's tools and machinery. These are called enzymes. But class, an enzyme is just a special form of a protein. So it's just another protein made up of a string of amino acids. And they take care of the metabolism. That's your growth and maintenance. Very important. So I'm going to be asking you some questions in a little while, and I'm telling you now the answer, protein. So you remember that. Most of the questions I'm going to ask you, that's the answer. I'm not finished. That's just the first class. The nucleic acids seem tailor-made for reproduction, but can achieve rather little else compared with the more elaborate and better equipped proteins. So there's another class of molecules. It's called the nucleic acids, the genes. We call it DNA and RNA now. And they're the ones that take care of reproduction. They are the ones that allow you to reproduce yourself, that allow cells to reproduce. So you have to have both. So listen to what Dr. Crick says about that. The problem of the origin of life, how did we get life in the first place? The problem of the origin of life would be a great deal easier to approach if there were only one family of macromolecules capable of doing both jobs. But life, as we know it, employs two, always. So may I say it again, class? No matter what living thing you look at, from single-celled organisms up to elephants and us, every living thing has proteins and nucleic acids working together to function so that that thing is alive. That'll be on the quiz tomorrow. So get those two things. I have to go on here for just a minute. So having introduced all of that, Dr. Crick then later on page 88 says this: an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now, and this book was published in 1983, could only state that in some sense the origin of life at the moment appears to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to be satisfied to get it going. And then he goes on to explain why it probably wasn't a miracle. The plain fact is that the time available was too long, the many microenvironments on the earth too diverse, and the various chemical possibilities too numerous, and our knowledge and imagination too feeble to allow us to be able to unravel exactly how it might have or might have not have happened. In other words, we still believe it could have happened. Non-living things producing living things. But it's tough. And at the end of this particular page, he says, if it was highly likely, there's no problem. Folks, highly likely, when I get finished tonight telling you what we know, and you walk out of here thinking it's highly likely that evolved by itself without God, you need your head examined. And what does Dr. Crick do in the rest of this book? He says, but if it turns out that it was rather unlikely, then we're compelled to consider what it might have arisen in other places in the universe, where possibly for one reason or another, conditions were more favorable. And the last several chapters of this book is talking about directed panspermia. And you don't know what that is. It's the study of how somebody sent us the first life forms here on a spaceship. This is a Nobel Prize laureate class who spends 4 chapters. There's a whole chapter on what the spaceship might have been like and what they might have sent on the spaceship. Folks, is there one scintilla of scientific evidence that somebody sent a spaceship here with life forms on it? There is not. But that's how far Dr. Crick and others like him will go to have to not say there was a God that did it. You take that for what it's worth. You read this for yourself. It's a fairy tale, class. So let's talk about the way life really is. And Dr. Crick knows it, which is why he wonders if it could have happened here in 3.5 billion years. I don't care how much time you give folks, life did not come about by natural causes in this universe, period. So here we go. We're officially beginning, because I'm presenting to you, class, the 20 common amino acids that occur in proteins in all living things. Small exception, I've been corrected by medical students that there are some things that are proteins that are made from some others than these, but that's 99.9% a correct statement on here. Close enough for government work. These are the 20 common amino acids in proteins in every living thing, whether it's a one-celled organism or you. Now let me pause there just a moment. What do you think an evolutionist says about that fact? Here's what they say. Why does every living thing have a common chemistry? Because you have a common ancestry. If you trace your lineage back far enough in the tree of life, you have a common ancestry with every other living thing down here at the base of the tree. And they say it's some kind of single-celled organism that were first formed from non-living things by themselves back billions of years ago, and then evolved into all of us. And that's why we have a common chemistry. Class, that is not a stupid answer. That's a possible answer. We have a common chemistry because we evolved from a common ancestry. That's not a stupid answer. But I think there's a better answer. How about common design? if a designer was going to make a living system that had to interplay and even interfeed, would it not need a common chemistry? And does a designer have to start all over just because he's making something else when they're supposed to interplay? I mean, the common designer is a wonderful answer to that question as well. So you need to go much deeper than that to answer this question, which I'm going to take you a little deeper. But I want to be fair that the evolutionary answer to this question is not unreasonable. It is a fact, class, that these 20 commonly occurring amino acids occur in proteins in every living thing. I don't care what you're looking at. That's what you're going to find. So, your first job in my class is to learn these 20. That's tomorrow's quiz. And what I want you to learn first is the names of them: glycine, alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, proline, serine, threonine, aspartic acid, asparagine, glutamic acid, glutamine, lysine, arginine, cysteine, methionine, phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, and histidine. And they're 3-letter abbreviations, which are easy because most of them are very reasonable, as you can see. So tomorrow you'll know those 20, right? And I'll pause here just a minute and let you memorize them right now. And why is this so important? I'll tell you why it's important, class, because it's only the foundation for all proteins, which are the workhorses and do most everything in every living thing. They're only the most critical substance to your life in terms of magnitude and numbers of them. So you need to know if you're going to study biochemistry. Every protein is a combination of these 20. And it's very much like the 26 letters of the alphabet in English that make up our words. The word anti-disestablishmentarianism is a big, long word, but every letter in it is one of the letters of this 26-letter alphabet, isn't it? So it's just a combination of those letters. A protein, class, is a string of these amino acids. So may I suggest to you, if you want to be alive for a long time, you be sure you get your amino acids, because they're needed to make proteins in your bodies. Some of them your body produces, others your body doesn't produce. You ought to know that and use it to your good. That's my introduction to this broad subject, and I hope you got it. I have to go to the other topic now, and may I apologize to every protein. We ought to spend the next 6 weeks on the proteins. But I have to go on to the DNA and talk to you about the other side. There's this another great class of molecules. DNA is what Crick and Watson discovered the structure of. It's a double helix with crossbars. I want you to look up here. See, there's a strand like this, and here's another one wrapped around it. See it? And there's cross pieces. In this diagram, the cross pieces are color-coded. Don't think that DNA looks like that. That's just a picture to help you see it. But the 4 colors are nice because that means there's 4 kinds of things that are the cross pieces. And those are, they give it the capacity to reproduce itself, and those 4 things are A, T, G, and C: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And all of you that are nodding your heads have just had biology, right? Those are the cross pieces. And the fascinating thing is, A always goes with T, and G always goes with C, like love and marriage and a horse and carriage. So A and T and G and C mesh together. So when you look up at this picture up here, every time you see a red one, you see it hooked to a yellow one. You see that? And every time you see a blue one, you see it hooked to a green one, always. And the reason for that is, class, listen to me closely, their chemistry. The chemistry of adenine and thymine are such that they can bond. And the same with G and C. That's why you need to know their chemistry. It's only life-changing. So the DNA inside of it has a language with 4 letters. And here's a way to describe it. This is a chart called the genetic code. This came to be unfolded for us by Crick and Watson and a lot of others who researched it in the 60s and 70s. By the end of the 70s, we knew all this. Most of what I'm telling you right now, class, was understood by us by the end of the 70s. We're in 2024. There's a whole lot more that ought to be said. And I'm going to tell you some more. But this we knew then. Let's watch just briefly how this works. Here are the 4 letters, thymine, cytosine, adenine, and guanine. And across the top they are again. And here they are a third time over here, so that you can put together all the possibilities of 4 letters taken 3 at a time. Because the genetic code language has only 3-letter words. But class, may I let this sink into your minds? In every cell of every living thing, there is a language. It's a language with 4 letters that makes 3-letter words. And we know precisely what every 3-letter word means. We also know what the body does with it in amazing ways to build things and to keep a record of what's going on. If this were a jury, and I were asking you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to decide, do you think this came about by natural causes or that some grand creator made it? Which would you think is more reasonable? I would say to you, there is 0 evidence that anything ever produced a language that wasn't intelligent. An intelligent source is required. There is 0 evidence for anything else. So I could rest my case right now, but you know I'm not finished. But you see up here the 64 words that can be formed by 4 letters taken 3 at a time with repeats. So for just a minute, I want to help you learn to read. You're going to read the genetic code. So here we go. Everybody's eyes up here. Let's suppose that you have a 3-letter word made up of thymine, thymine, and thymine. That's T-T-T. You pronounce it t-t-t. This is not a spoken language. That's T-T-T. How about C-T-T? That's t-t. And how about A-G-A? Aga. You see what I'm doing? I'm making 3-letter words using any possible combination. There are exactly 64 words in this language. And what we've learned is every one means something. So let me get you to be thinking here. The TTT is PHE. That's what it means. You say, that's really helpful. TTT means PHE. Well, it should be helpful because you memorized the 20 amino acids, right? A minute ago. One of them is called phenylalanine, and its abbreviation is PHE. So when you read TTT in DNA language, you're talking about phenylalanine. That's amino acid. Do something with your head. Did I get that across? I know you youngsters got it because you're studying it in science right now. What you have up here, class, is all 20 amino acids coded for, and some of them multiple codes in the DNA. In addition to that, if you'll pay attention, there's a code right here, ATG, that stands for methionine, but that code also means start reading. Then, do you see there's 3 up here with the word TERM right there? What do you think TERM means? Anybody want to guess? Terminator. What? Stop reading. That's what it means. It's a terminator. If you read that in DNA language, it means stop reading. So there's a code to start reading. You read 3-letter words, and then there's a code to say stop reading. When you start reading and you read three-letter words, a string of three-letter words is a string of amino acids. And class, a string of amino acids is a protein. Pretty good. That's right. So between start reading and stop reading is a string of amino acids, which is a protein. What you have here, class, is a code to tell the body how to construct proteins. Amazing. And people present this in science classes as if, isn't this amazing what Mother Nature did? Class, it's a wonderful opening to say, isn't it amazing what some creator did? No language has ever been produced without some intelligent mind behind it. And this is an amazing language that works remarkably well and does all kinds of things. Well, you know we should spend much more time on that, but I want to go on further. Just the language is useless unless you have the other set of macromolecules, the proteins, to do something with it. So look, most of the DNA is in the nucleus of a cell, of a eukaryote cell, right here. Some of it is outside, and there, of course, there are other kinds of cells that have not necessarily nuclear material, but inside the cell there's lots of DNA. So, there it is. Well, that's where the information resides. The problem is you can't do anything if you don't copy it. So there has to be a transcription. You have to be able to make a copy of what's on here. Do you see this right here? You have to unzip the DNA, and then you make a copy. The copy is called messenger RNA or transfer RNA, ribosomal RNA or transfer RNA. There's three kinds of RNA that are produced. And it's copying information off the DNA. Well, class, I want to say this now, and I'm going to say it a bunch of times. What do you think it takes to allow the DNA to make copies of itself? That was weak. Let me try again. What do you think it takes to have the DNA make copies of itself? Exactly. A bunch of proteins. All right, I go on. After the copy is made, it has to be processed. You see these little white things in here? Those are called introns. They are snipped out, and this thing is matured. It's reorganized into what's called the mature messenger RNA. What do you think it takes for that to happen, class? Be more enthusiastic. It takes a bunch of proteins to make that happen. That's called editing and splicing. There are proteins called editosomes and spliceosomes that are extremely complex, that are absolutely necessary to mature that messenger RNA, that are working in your system all the time. Looks like a plan to me. But that's not enough. The mature RNA then has to migrate here, you see? Has to migrate outside the nucleus through little holes. There are holes in the cell nucleus. Do you think any respectable hole is just going to let anything through there? No, class. What do you think it takes to allow messenger RNA to proceed through the hole? Protein. Exactly. There's a protein that has to open up and say, come on through. And when he gets through, it closes back up and doesn't allow anything else in and out. And on the other side of that hole, there's another protein guarding the gate as well. Exactly. So now we're outside the nucleus, and here comes the messenger RNA, and it's picked up by two ducks hugging themselves. Isn't that what that looks like? That's not what it looks like, class. That is a picture. But these are called ribosomes. They're made up of RNA and other materials, and what else do you think? Protein. Exactly. Ribosomes have a bunch of complicated stuff in them. I mean, we could spend the next week on ribosomes, class, and should. They deserve it. The ribosomes pick up the messenger RNA and read it like a tape through a tape player, And you see the code here, G-U-G, C-G-C, A-C. There's 3-letter words. And they are read as you read through the ribosomes. And out the bottom comes a string of amino acids, otherwise known as a protein, that is being built by the use of the code. Now, what we don't have time to talk about, class, since this is only our first class, is there's a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. You see, the ribosomal RNA contributes to this little guy right here. And the transfer RNAs are out here in your cytoplasm picking up the appropriate amino acids. There's one transfer RNA for each amino acid, plus there's a specific protein for each amino acid, along with the transfer RNA, to allow the transfer RNA to bring those things up here to the ribosomes and introduce them, and then build this string of amino acids. And this works so efficiently that your body can build a protein with 1,000 amino acids in a row in microseconds. You didn't get that. Here's a blow up with a little more experience. I want to tell you one extra thing here before we go on, because I've got a video for you. I want to show you how incredible this is. And today we are blessed to have media that's so much better than we had 30 years ago. But before I leave this, you know those little introns right here? When we first started discovering that the messenger RNA isn't just copied and then used directly, it has introns that are snipped out most of the time. What do you think evolutionists said about that? Here's what they said. The introns are snipped out and thrown away, so they're garbage. This doesn't look like design to me. Why would a designer make something where you have to copy it and then snip it out and reorganize it before you use it? That's a stupid plan. That's not a plan. That's a result of the evolution of this. Evolution does things like that because it doesn't know where it's going when it starts. And it does stupid things sometimes, or things that are not things you wouldn't plan out. And no engineer would make introns, is what they were saying. And so introns were junk. And then when we started mapping the whole DNA molecule, as we did in the early 2000s, all of you were alive by then, most of you. And that mapping of the whole human genome was finished in about 2003 to 2004. They found that in the DNA were just stretches, vast stretches of wasteland, it looks like. And in some cases, what they called pseudogenes, and in other cases, other stuff. And they began making comments like, why would some God produce all that junk in the DNA? And DNA became a whipping boy for belief in God, because it had a whole lot of junk DNA, we were told. Well, as a creationist, I didn't know how to answer that. I don't think God would make junk, do you? So you know what I've found out over time? If there's something you can't explain, and there will always be something you can't explain, class, no matter what your worldview is, there'll always be something you can't explain. Wait a few years. Because now there's a book called The Myth of Junk DNA. And there's been a whole study done called ENCODE to learn what the rest of that DNA is doing. And the results are overwhelming, class, that there's a lot of stuff going on in the DNA we never knew one thing about 10 years ago. And it's doing incredible, amazing things nobody knew one thing about. So you better be careful what you call junk. I got caught about that in a lecture on the campus of USF by a professor who stood up and said, now, Dr. Payne, you've done a good job of explaining the amazing process of protein building, but what you haven't told this class is that DNA up there is mostly junk. We've learned in the last few years that probably no more than 5% of that DNA is needed to build all the proteins in your whole body. So what about the rest of that stuff? What we've learned is it's junk. And why would God do that? I hadn't heard this before, class, at that time. So what do you do about that? Here's what I did. I said, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm going to learn real quick. So if you ask me a question later tonight and I don't know what you're talking about, that's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to try to bluff it, but I will go research it and get back with you. I said that to him, but I said, sir, I will ask you to think about this one thing. You probably should be careful what you call junk, because in the 1800s, there was a scientist who said that your human body was filled with vestigial organs that were leftovers of your evolutionary past. Over 150 on his list. And you know, sir, how many of those are still on the list of vestigial organs today? Depends on who you talk to, but maybe 2, 5 at the most. And even those are questionable. So what we did in the last 100 years is we learned a whole lot more about how the body functions than we knew then. So I'd be very careful about that. And I can tell you that answer was justified with lots of support. So, it's true there's introns. Class, did you know those introns are used to make a whole lot of small RNAs? They're being used for all kinds of stuff we didn't know anything about. So I just wanted to throw that in free of charge, because we don't have time to really get into that in detail tonight. But don't think I'm being ignorant about a lot of things that I've discovered in the last 20 years. This we already talked about. So we're ready for this. This gentleman named Drew Berry works at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research in Melbourne, Australia. And he's taken it upon himself to become the world's best biomedical animator. And I think he's marvelous. If you want to see some fascinating things, you go to his website and look up some of the animations that he's done. And I'm going to show you one. And we're going to talk our way through it here. And the purpose primarily of this animation is to have you see the remarkable process of building a protein and how incredibly fast it is. So I want to say a word about my IT guy here just a minute. He's been working on this for a couple of weeks to help me be ready, because you can't do this without an IT guy. So, thank you. And he's not only he's good. He's better than most of the IT guys I've had. Because you see, I can mess up things really good that are IT related, and he knows how to help me recover. But this guy has made a video, and I'm going to just forward here like this. This is the video we're going to show you now of the process of building a protein. So what you see on the screen before you right now is a strand of DNA, unwrapped. May I say this to you? DNA in your cell is all wrapped up. It's amazingly long, and it's all wrapped around things. It is so well organized, class. We've learned it is so well organized. You can pick up information from here and 1,000 miles down the road, if I may use that analogy, and have them work, and you can see how they work together. That's another whole subject. But what you're seeing right here is one small piece of it stretched out, which you need to do if you're going to build a protein. All right, you also see a glob of proteins here that are riding along it. So that's the beginning, and now we're going to show you kind of the process in this animation of what happens. You ready? Let's do it. So here you see the start of a gene. Bone strength protein is what we're going to build right now. So here you see this glob of protein. Stop right there. This is our vitamin D coming up in your cytoplasm in the nucleus. Eat your vitamin D, class. Get out in the sun. Do you have sun here in Seattle? Yeah, I think you do. Yeah, you need your sun. You need vitamin D, because look, this vitamin D is going to come up here and activate this protein right here. Go ahead. So here goes. And boom. Stop. Of course, when it does it, the protein turns green. Wrong. That's a picture. It's an animation to show you that what's happened is chemically, the vitamin D has activated that chemical to do what it needs to do in this thing, which begins a process here. So let's go. When that process starts, another glob of proteins comes up. Stop right there. You see that these are different colors. The reason for his coloring them differently is because each one of those is a different protein involved. So there's a glob of proteins involved in the process of building proteins. Class. I'm going to say this probably 5 times, but in case I forget, you need proteins to build proteins. Did you hear me? DNA by itself is not good enough. You need proteins to build proteins. So you see this whole glob up there? You wouldn't get the first protein if you didn't have that glob of proteins. Class, are you listening? That is a protein. How did it get built? Yeah. You had to have that protein to build that protein. You with me? Not only that, you had to have all the rest of these proteins to build those proteins. So how'd the first one get started? This is a problem for having 2 giant systems. Why do you think Francis Crick eventually says we might need to have it sent here on the first spaceship, as if that answers the question? The fact is, class, you need a glob of proteins to get this started. And here we go. Once that starts, you're going to let this is ribonuclease. It's going to ride along here. That's an enzyme. That's a specific protein. And here we are. And we're going to stop right there for just a second. Here's the DNA strand. Here's the ribonuclease, the protein, this glob, and coming out the top of it is the messenger RNA that's been copied down inside there. So what you're watching is it's picking up the code, copying it, zipping back together, and moving on. Class, what do you think it takes to unzip DNA? Protein. Exactly right. You're getting weaker. But that's what it takes. We're going to look inside. Go ahead. In just a minute, we're going to kind of focus down inside here, and I'm going to show you something. There it is. Stop. Here's that glob of protein, and see all these little guys? These are the various parts that have to come in and be used to make the messenger RNA. One piece at a time. Go. All right, so now we're down inside. See this thing unzipped now? Stop right there just a second. It's unzipped thanks to the protein. And now you see the code here on the DNA, G, G, T, A, G, and so on, the 3-letter words. One at a time, those words are being mimicked. So the G has a C over here, the G has a C, the T has an A, the A has a U, which replaces the T, and so on. But one at a time, you're copying the code. Let's go. Stop again. One of the problems with these videos in the past was it was very difficult to show you how rapidly this takes place. This is way too slow. So Drew Barry did us the honor of giving you some feeling of how rapidly those copies are made so that the entire information on the DNA for a specific protein is ready to be used. So let's watch. Go. That's real speed, folks. Stop right there just a moment. I forgot to tell you one other thing. You ever have trouble zipping something up? Guess what it takes to zip the DNA back up? Proteins. There's a specialized proteins to help you zip it back up because it can get tangled. And you talk about a mess if you tangle DNA. So there are proteins for that too. So I should have had somebody start counting how many times we've said proteins. Let's keep going. And here he comes outside. I've already talked about this. This is the messenger RNA. He's now going to be picked up by the ribosomes, and it does not look like two ducks hugging each other. It looks more like a glob. And you see all these three-letter codes coming along here? They're going to be read through this thing like a tape through a tape player. See all these little guys coming up here? Those are transfer RNAs. And I'm going to show you now, starting in a minute. Starting right now. See these different ones? Go. Different, 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 different. Those are all amino acids. There's one specific transfer RNA for each amino acid. In addition to that, there's a specific that goes with that transfer RNA that allows it to bring that particular amino acid up to the ribosome and enter it in. And now we're going to go down inside here. Go? We're going, aren't we? Okay. We're going to go down inside now and watch this a little bit. Isn't this amazing stuff? Here's the transfer RNA right here, one at a time coming up. Stop right there for just a second. You see this transfer RNA? The code is down here matching that code. The amino acid is up here at the top being added to this string of amino acids, which becomes the protein up here at the top. Code down here, matching DNA, matching amino acids up here, and it's being added to that string right there. Go. Except it goes way faster than that. This is a hemoglobin protein. It's red because it really is red. Come on, guys. You're slow as molasses. Stop right there. Class, you've just built one protein. Probably about 50 amino acids long. A string of amino acids is a protein, you remember? That's not all there is to it. That string has to fold up on itself in a specific three-dimensional structure. And if that structure isn't, what did we say last night? It won't work. And there are hundreds at least ways for that thing to fold up differently, and we've been testing that recently to see how many of those possible ways that it could fold work, and it's like one. But that's what it takes. And what this doesn't show is there's a little organelle in the cell that takes that protein inside of it as it formulates into its final shape. And guess what that's made of? Exactly right. Go ahead. I think we're finished, aren't we? Yeah. Class, what I've just shown you is that building one protein takes at least 50 specific proteins, each of which has to also be built, using the very proteins it takes to build one. And in the process of doing it, you're using a language that is being read, translated, and transcribed at an enormous rate. All of this takes place in microseconds. You know how fast that is? That was way too slow. And this class is over. Don't you leave, because the next class is picking up here where we left off. And there's a whole lot more to talk about. Thank you for your attention.